This is the Living Vertizontal podcast, brought to you by The Church at Riverstone, a fellowship of the Church of the Nazarene in Madera, California. We are a podcast that discusses the intersection of Scripture and our lives. Together, we continue the conversation that was started each preceding Sunday morning in our worship gathering.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nick.
And I'm Natasha.
And we are the Living Vertizontal podcast with you this week at the start of season 9, which is the beginning of this season of Lent that we will be journeying with you together over these next 40 days, excluding Sundays, because Sundays are for celebration. But before we move into kind of the Lent discussion proper that we're going to be working through today, I think it would be appropriate for us to just kind of hark back to the end of season 8 where we are breaking from, right? We've been on this journey through Luke together. We are in the midst of Luke chapter 12. We just finished with verse 34, so we were looking at 22 through 34. And as we read this passage last week, as we worked through it, we heard Jesus's invitation to grow in dependence, to grow in trust in him. Like it was a continuous warning against worrying and or anxiety or striving for really everyday things like our food, our clothing. Like these are things that at our core we need to survive. And Jesus, throughout our passage last week, essentially said, don't worry about those things.
Matter of fact, any worrying you do is going to be completely useless. You can't even add an hour to your life by worrying.
Right, exactly. And so with our passage last week, we have Jesus essentially saying, don't worry, but not don't worry because I don't care. Essentially the opposite. Don't worry because your Father does care about you immensely.
He knows what you need and
right.
He will provide.
And life is so much bigger than these little anxieties that we often allow to consume our lives. And so it was just this invitation to look beyond. And so it's perfect then that now, concluding that conversation, we move into this season of Lent where we are invited into a time of reflection, a time where we examine our lives and maybe even allow Jesus to search with us to point out those places in our life where we have the anxiety cropping up, where maybe we recognize, man, that's one area of my own life where I'm struggling to depend on Jesus. And as a result, I'm experiencing anxiety there. And in this season, it's well suited and intended for us to search those things with him and to surrender those things to him. And so over this next 40 days, we're going to be working to this end, working through the Lenten devotional, A Consuming Fire from the Foundry, and discussing the passages for each of the given Sundays throughout our podcast, really with an eye to kind of bring us back to that place of reflection, that place of recognizing our need to grow in dependence and to kind of allow him to do the weeding and the picking apart of those places where we are experiencing anxiety so we can better enter his rest, which I think kind of takes us perfectly into our passage for today. And so today, we're going to be working through Psalm 95. And so, Natasha, would you read for us Psalm 95?
Yes. Psalm 95, verse 1. Come, let us sing for joy to the Lord. Let us shout aloud to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before him with thanksgiving and extol him with music and song. For the Lord is the great God, the great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Come, let us bow down and worship. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the flock under his care. Today, if only you would hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years, I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray, and they have not known my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest.
All right. Thank you for reading that for us, Natasha. I think before we really jump into the conversation on the passage, maybe there's a few more pieces that should be identified about the season of Lent. And maybe you know these things, but maybe you don't. And it's always helpful for us to just be reminded of them every year. And so I had previously said before you read, Natasha, that Lent was a 40-day journey leading up to Easter, not including Sundays. And that number 40 is important. As you heard, as Natasha read this passage today, the number 40 came up, and it was for 40 years. And there's another place where, there's multiple other places where 40 comes up, but another really important one to this conversation is Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness as well. And so these 40-day time periods are appropriately times where people are tested in their reliance on God or their dependence on God, where Jesus cemented his identity as the Son of God, but also really cemented the reality that this life is not just about him and meeting his own needs, but him depending on his Father for everything. So that's kind of like the thing that I wanted to identify about the number 40 as it relates to this conversation of Lent. The other thing that I wanted to identify as we move into our conversation on this passage is from a structural standpoint, like this psalm kind of has two movements.
It definitely takes a turn there in the middle.
Right. So we were having a conversation on this passage on Tuesday night at our midweek gathering, and that was the thing that kept bothering me. Like, we read it, and man, at the beginning, it feels great. It I don't know, it's exciting. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden there's like this phrase in the middle that seems like a turning point, like you said, and then it's just all downhill. It's like all bad is what it felt like. And so verses 1 through 7a, right? Because it's actually like the last part of 7 where you see this turn take place. But verses 1 through 7a is this joyful call to worship. Like, it's an exciting thing to read. And we'll talk more about it, but just the recognizing who God is, even in the midst of this, it's incredible. But then you move to the turning point in 7b and then to verse 11, and it really comes out to be this like warning. And so with those kind of two pieces in mind, as we begin to work through this, let's just start at the top, Psalm 95:1, and kind of work through it, maybe not necessarily verse by verse, but just idea at a time, and let's see where we go.
Yeah, I mean, my first, I guess, read of this passage, I'm sitting there and I'm reading about all of these characteristics of who God is, or these descriptors of who God is. Yep. Oftentimes in our small groups, we've sat around and we've identified the characteristics or attributes of who God is. So answering a question of who do we say you are, God? And in answering those, I'm underlining all of these words that are in there, that are true of who God is. And as I'm looking back over those, even now, I'm just struck with such awe that the God that we're talking about here in this passage, the God who is King of all gods, the God who gives salvation, the God who is the rock, like all of these things, the God of who is the maker, right? He made all things. That God, with 8 billion plus people in the world, is interested and concerned with me. That he invites me to come into his presence to worship. And when you really come face to face with that reality, that the creator of the universe knows me in this time, right? We're not talking about 8 billion people like across all time. I mean, that's just right now, right? But he is coming to us and says, rest in my presence.
Yeah.
And depend on me. I have you. I know your needs. Mm-hmm. Come sit with me.
Yeah, I think That's what's pretty incredible as you read through these first 7 verses is the invitation, right? The invitation to worship and to be in the presence. Verse 2, let's come before his presence with a song of thanksgiving. Like an overwhelming recognition of who God is, right? As we read these descriptors, and then also simultaneously knowing who I am. It's just this.
We are so out of place.
So out of place. I don't belong. I don't belong here. And yet the invitation is still extended.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. And this is the God we serve. This is the God who serves us. This is the God who invites us into his presence, into his rest.
His presence and his care.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he doesn't just invite us into his presence to say, hey, look how wonderful and great I am, but to love us and to care for us and to guide us, right? The language used is us as his flock.
Yep.
Which is so appropriate since this is a Psalm of David. It's so appropriate, right? That David would use this analogy, given that he too was a shepherd. We just got done watching the movie David again with the kids. And it's real fresh on my mind, I guess. But the care with which David took in dealing with his flock, each one was so special to him. He wasn't willing to lose not a single one.
Right.
And in the same way, God interacts with us at that same level. And yet we're so out of place. We're so unworthy. And so much of our devotional, I feel like over this past week has gone to kind of put us in that place, right? Recognizing this is the purpose kind of our Ash Wednesday, is to remind us of how from ashes we came and to ashes we'll return. And our lives are so brief and temporary and so little and really
fleeting.
Yeah, not meaningless, but almost meaningless on the big scope of things. And yet God cares so much for each one of us. And it's incredible. It's incredible, that kind of love. It compels us. It motivates us to something. How could it not?
Right. Well, and so connection made in my own mind, you were just kind of talking through how appropriate it's a Psalm of David, and we see that shepherd language kind of working its way into the Psalm. But my mind immediately went back to last week in the conversation that we had through Luke, where Jesus actually identifies his disciples and those following as my little flock.
Mm-hmm.
And just, I don't know, like this Psalm was written by David. Yes, obviously inspired by his relationship with God, right? But then we have Jesus speaking and kind of echoing the same thing or confessing the same thing, where it puts creation in the position of being this flock, like God's flock, where yes, there's an element of vulnerability. Yes, there's an element of, man, we are dependent on the shepherd, but then there's also this other dynamic where the shepherd cares deeply for the flock and is not willing to lose any part of his flock and is willing really to go to whatever extreme it is to protect his flock, to pursue his flock. And just, I don't know, again, situated in the place where it's like, I'm overwhelmed that this is the one who is inviting us into his presence. This is the one who says, even though you may think you don't have a place here, your place is with me. You have a place. Come to me in worship.
Well, and then, okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, this big turn that we hit at the second part of verse 7.
Right.
He brings up, so the psalmist, David, in addressing the Israel community, we can assume, right? Mm-hmm. So in addressing the Israelite community, he brings up the past.
Right.
He brings up, and it's not that these people specifically were responsible for this sort of faithlessness.
Sure.
But this is their history. This is a part of the fabric of who they are and their interaction as a people with God, and a reminder of their place relative to God.
Yep.
And really a call to contrast, right? A call to be different. And really, that's how David intends this. It's a warning. It is a warning to act and behave in a way that is different from that of their ancestors.
Yeah. So as we go into this, and as I was looking at it, I know for me, like I think I picked up on most of the things. At least I could understand. Like he must be talking about their wilderness wanderings, right? Because it talks about for 40 years I was angry with that generation,
Right.
and so like I'm obviously thinking like the exile wanderings,
Yes.
before getting to the promised land. But as I was initially reading it, I'm like, okay, well, there's this Meribah, there's this Massa, like, and then there's wilderness. There's like kind of three locations that are identified. And I get wilderness, pretty general, like a place of testing, a place that's hard to be. But I didn't know the other ones. And where they were, what happened, what significance they were. So looked into them. Fortunately, my Bible has cross references for like a little letter.
How convenient.
Yeah, it's very convenient. Little letter off to the side of each of these locations to like say that there's something here to identify. And it kind of directed my attention to Exodus 17, 1-7, and then Numbers 20, 1-13 for Meribah and Massa. And what you find if you go to either of those places is both of these spots were named after the fact, but they were the locations where the people of Israel in exile started complaining, started grumbling, started causing problems because of their desire for water. They were thirsty, and they kind of laid into Moses as a result of being thirsty.
Yeah, and if you know the history of the wanderings in the wilderness, you know that these people were known for their grumbling,
Yes.
complaining, and quarreling with God. It wasn't just water they complained about. It was hunger. It was the type of food God was providing.
Manna's not good enough. I need meat.
We need more.
Right.
And so, yeah, there was a lot of this.
Yeah, and so Massa and Meribah come up specifically in the Exodus passage where Moses actually renames that site that they are at. I believe it's Horeb, if I remember correctly, but renames the site where they are at Massa and Meribah, which is interpreted as testing and quarreling, because the people of Israel were testing God and quarreling with each other. And they were in this place where they were just kind of remembering back to their past. They were remembering back to Egypt, and they were essentially saying like, we had it better in Egypt than we do right here. Even though God is providing for us with manna, even though we're about to get water out of a rock, or if you're reading the Numbers one, even though we've already gotten water out of a rock once before and now we're thirsty again and we're expecting some kind of deliverance, but we are remembering back to Egypt, and we're remembering that it was so much better there. Because when I was thirsty, I could get a drink. And right now I'm thirsty and I can't get a drink. They are just, these places are places that represent such like nearsightedness and such disrespect for the deliverance that God had given them and the provision that God was giving them. It was like they're in this place where they're even questioning, not like, they actually are questioning the very presence of the one who is actively delivering them.
Right. Their hearts are hardened. They're hardened towards God, and they're ungrateful for the deliverance.
Right. And so like that's where you see this turn, like you see this invitation to worship. Yes. And I would imagine the people of Israel had an invitation to worship. I mean, if you go back to Exodus, like you see Miriam has a song that she sings after they are like escape the Egyptians. You see others offer up songs of praise as well. Like there is worship that is regularly happening because they recognize the deliverance that they're experiencing. But then as soon as they like get just a step removed from that moment, all of a sudden they allow all of the other like anxieties of life to seep in. And it diminishes that desire for worship, and it's replaced by this hard heart, this heart of questioning, this heart of doubting that God is who he said he is, that God will do what he said he will do.
Yeah, we often are so ready to trust God for the big stuff, for the miracle moment.
Yeah.
But trusting him in the journey is hard.
Yeah.
Trusting him in the journey is where oftentimes we kind of follow the hardened hearts of the Israelites. We grumble, we complain, we question, we doubt. We don't trust God's provision. We don't trust his plan. We don't trust that he's in control. And so while it's easy to stand, on this side of things and point a finger at these Israelites, how could they so quickly forget? I mean, but this circumstance is different, right? This time they're asking for water, not food. This time they're asking, and it's a constant. This time they're asking for provision, not deliverance. And so this is somehow slightly different than what God has done before. And so therefore it justifies my disbelief, my complaint, my questioning. Yeah. And so I think that it just brings to light something that is super, super important for us to remember, and that is to trust God in the journey, not just for the miracle moment.
Yeah, that's really good, because I feel that there is a lot of truth there. When it comes to a sustained dependence or a sustained trust, that is somehow so much more difficult than a momentary trust.
Yeah, because the wilderness is not fun. It is not easy.
No.
There may be moments of glory, like glory moments where you can point to an event, one piece of that story that was a bright spot. But all in all, when you look back at a wilderness, it's not usually a moment where you're like, I'd go back and live that again. I mean, you might say, God, thank you for taking me through that. I'm glad we're done with that. I'm glad you taught me what you taught me, but I never want to do that again.
Sure. And yet at the same time, as I think about, we're talking about the Israelites. So let's think about the Israelites in the wilderness. One thing that I can say for sure, one thing that they can say for sure, as they look back over the wilderness thing, is as difficult as things might have been, as hard as it might be to admit their faults in the midst of it all, one thing they can for sure identify is the reality of God's presence, because it's undeniable, right? God was there with a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. God was there in their wilderness. And I think the reality and the truth is, so often, if we were to look back at our wilderness, we could probably begin to identify where God was at in the midst of it. Now, in the moment, it can be very difficult. I understand that. Like, I don't want to diminish the wilderness experiences, because they're real and they're tough. But when we look back, we can begin to identify where God was in the midst of it.
Well, and I think even if when you're in the wilderness, you take a moment to look for God in the midst of it, I think that you will be amazed at all the surprising places you begin to see him at work.
Yes.
Because God is so active and his activity is so apparent when we are in the wilderness. It's one of the things where I think wilderness can be blessing, because that's where you feel, you get close to God in those moments, because you realize what you lack. You realize that I am incapable of handling this situation on my own. This is bigger than me. I am in mourning. I cover myself in ash. I dress myself in sackcloth, because there is nothing I can do about this. It's God or nothing.
Right.
And so in those moments, we're forced into this dependence, which we so often try to reclaim, right? I want my independence. I want to be self-sufficient, all of these things. But in those moments where you realize I don't have this, God has to have it or nothing. It's this forced reliance. It's a call back to where we were always meant to live anyway.
Right.
And those moments, I think, are so great at deepening our faith deepening our dependence, deepening our relationship with God. And so God is noticeable in those dark places. He's
Right.
noticeable in the wilderness if we'll only take the moment to look around, wipe the tears from our eyes and try to hunt for where he is and what he's doing. And even when we don't see him, to continue to believe that he's there and trust that he's there and seek
And look
to
expectantly.
see. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's what the psalmist here is drawing out with the transition. And I think it's something that we need to make sure we hold on to. So at the turning point in verse 7, the verse that stuck out to me on Tuesday when we first started talking about it still sticks out to me now. And it says, "Today, if only you would hear his voice." I can only imagine if the people of Israel then, before they are in the midst of this testing and quarreling attitude of their own, I could only imagine if only they were hearing his voice, this quarreling, this testing, this complaining about the water or lack of water or the manna or the quail just would not have happened because they would have recognized his voice. And I feel like it's the same for us, right? We have the choice. We can go one of two ways when we're in these times of wilderness. Like you just said, like they're definitely kind of a place where we could have dependence on him. Like we could choose the path of dependence, or we could choose the path of the hardened heart like the Israelites did. And I think the difference between the two is pausing in the midst of that wilderness and being willing to hear his voice. Because the truth is, God is there. We know from scripture, there is nowhere that we can go to escape from his presence.
Jonah tried.
Yeah. We have prophets with story, like a book that tells a story about how people have tried to escape his presence. But then there's also Psalms that say, where can I go to escape your presence? I can't go to the highest highs. I can't go to the lowest lows. I can't go to the darkest places, the lightest places. It doesn't matter. You are there. And so if when we are in our wilderness moments, we would stop long enough to, if only we would stop long enough to hear his voice, we can take that path of dependence rather than defaulting to the destructive behavior of the Israelites, the hardened hearts, right? And so as we are working through this season of Lent together, we are walking a wilderness path. Yes, it's kind of one of the season's making, right?
A reflective wilderness.
A reflective wilderness. But the truth is, there's probably many of us who are going through some type of wilderness of our own as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we are walking this reflective wilderness or in our own wilderness experiences, may we hear the call of the psalmist to hear his voice. Recognize that God is here with us in this wilderness time. The invitation is just to listen for it. Because in this time of wilderness, we have two options before us. Are we going to choose the path of dependence? Are we going to choose the path where we do hear or expect to hear, so we listen and walk in dependence? Or are we going to choose the path of hardening, where we try to provide for ourselves and spiral into anxiety? You see, if we take that path of anxiety, of the path of spiraling, the path of the hardened heart, the warning is clear from the psalmist. It says, God declared on oath, in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. You see, God was saying that's more a statement on these people don't get to enter the promised land. This was a place that they were promised. This was a place where they were going to find rest from their journeys, from their travels, from the oppression that was all around them, from the different civilizations and pressures of empires. This was a place where they were going to find that rest. But because of their grumbling, because of their testing and their quarreling, they don't get to enter that place. Because of their lack of dependence, because they refused to listen, you don't get to find that rest. But if only we would hear his voice, grow in our opportunities for dependence, and fall at his feet in worship, that rest is something that we are promised. That peace is something that we are guaranteed, even in the midst of our wilderness journeys.
And so this week, as we were discussing this passage with the kids, we talked about how worship brings us closer to God when we're in the midst of a wilderness or a difficult situation. And so the challenge was made to find a way each day this next week to worship God, whether that's through song, whether it's through service, whether it's through prayer, whatever it is, find a way, whether you're in wilderness or you're in celebration, whatever state you find yourself in, find a way to worship God each day. As you journey with us through this Lenten season, we recommend purchasing A Consuming Fire, a Lenten devotional, which is available for purchase on Amazon. Also, be sure to follow the Living Vertizontal podcast to stay current on all our new releases. To learn more about the Church at Riverstone, visit us at thechurchatriverstone.org.